Hello there, viewers, and welcome to Cartoon Gateway. I'm your host, David Hollander. Here's a little known fact about me. My femur is contraband in the city of Guadalajara. No other city, and no other part of Mexico. Just my femur, no other part of my body. No idea why. I don't speak Spanish, so no one can explain it to me. Today's episode is on a subject I'm sure most people are familiar with if they spent even the slightest amount of time online. Banned cartoons. And more. It seems like every cartoon reviewer or video essayist does a video on this kind of thing, you know? And here I am. I used to do unique stuff, like questioning why romance even appears in cartoons, or talking about how Western animation depicts the family unit. And now I'm doing what everyone else does. God, I feel bad for that one commenter who suggested I do 11-minute versus half-hour shows. You know, a personal apology from me to you, commenter. You are the one person who played ball, and I just couldn't get an episode out of that. Whatever. Talking about banned cartoons is a rite of passage. I'm a real cartoon discusser. I don't want to be one of those awful cartoon channels for brainlets. Oh, you know the ones, like on TikTok, where someone just makes a face like they realized it was more than a fart and just plays a bit of a cartoon with text like, "Growing up is knowing what this scene meant." And it's obvious to everyone but the pig ignorant gutter trash who made it what the scene meant, because the scene says what the scene meant. So it's really just a way to steal content from cartoons with absolute minimal effort. And these people should be tarred and feathered, only to have the tar ripped off of them so they can be tarred and feathered with fresh burn marks. Oh, roll up, people. I think we've got a winner for most hateful run-on sentence on this show. Cartoons are animation, and animation is an art form, and no art form worth its salt exists without some form of controversy. Sometimes an episode of a show is pulled from airwaves for completely logical reasons, sometimes for completely insane reasons. Controversy is always on your doorstep, and that can sometimes get an episode of television censored or banned outright. Or sometimes a show can be completely ripped from our grasp because an executive decided doing so would be slightly more profitable than not doing so. I can cry on command by thinking about how Mau Mau Heroes of Pure Heart was both canceled and practically erased from streaming for that very reason. I'm not gonna cry on camera, but I guess I'm making this episode knowing the state of streaming services means most shows can just vanish into thin air. It's gotten to the point where people in the industry have to pirate their own work just to have a portfolio because so much of their work is made unavailable at basically random times. I miss when cartoons were lost for slightly sensible reasons, you know? Let's talk about some oddities, episodes, seasons, or even entire shows banned for one reason or another. So let's get down to brass tacks. Yeah! Yeah, I'm joking. We're actually gonna talk about South Park, but seriously, can we talk about Pingu? I found 6 episodes banned or censored for some form or another. One for blood, one for kissing, one for piss, one for slaps, one for cultural appropriation, one for walruses. What was Pingu doing? For real though, South Park, and probably the most infamous cartoon controversy of all time. Yeah, I finally get to talk at length about this show. Good for me. Look, whatever you got to say on the politics of South Park as a whole, I've got a lot of respect for the creators of the show, Matt Stone and Trey Parker. You can hardly call them lazy, seeing the absolute mountains of writing they do. I mean, maybe nowadays they've slowed down, and that mostly has to do with the legal status of the show's renewal being a bit questionable, and you can thank the streaming wars for that. In fact, at the time of writing, there's an ongoing situation which may result in a bunch more episodes of South Park being pulled from streaming, but we're not getting into that. That got dropped on me. I'm not adding that to the script. We're getting into the original only episodes of South Park not available to stream anywhere before those recent events. Super Best Friends, Cartoon Wars Part 1 and 2, 200, and 201. And these episodes all ran into the same issue, Muhammad. I don't mean you, viewer. Yeah, I know that, like, statistically Muhammad is the most common name in the world, but I'm not specifically messing with my Muhammad viewer base. I'm talking about the Prophet. You know, the most important figure in Islam, that Muhammad. What's wrong with him? Well, nothing. It's the show that hit upon the issue. Yeah, I'll admit, I'm not exactly a theologian nor Islamic scholar, but to my knowledge, it's considered blasphemy in the Muslim faith to visually depict Muhammad, caricature or otherwise. Like, some sources I found said it's just sacrilege to make a derogatory depiction of the Prophet, and other sources said it's literally just any attempt to show him at all. Either way, lots of people don't like it, and I respect that Islam made it impossible to depict their Messiah as a white guy. So I guess if word came out that South Park planned to show Muhammad, most people would assume that it would be derogatory. But South South Park understood that kind of thing was a theological faux pas, which led to the two-part episode Cartoon Wars. Yeah, I'm paraphrasing severely, but the episode is all about the topic of depicting Muhammad, reaching the ultimate conclusion that he should be allowed to be shown on the grounds of free speech. Now, there's a lot more to the two-part episode than that, mostly jabs at Family Guy, even a Bart Simpson appearance, but the episode ends with Muhammad airing uncensored, except not really. Because while the intention was that the prophet be shown, the South Park episode itself had the image of Muhammad censored, not actually showing him. Apparently, fictional Fox had bigger cojones than real-life Comedy Central. Who knew? Stone and Parker were a bit miffed that the network didn't back them up because the result is some severe mixed messaging in the episode itself. It's unclear exactly how big this controversy got, because if you look up South Park Muhammad episode controversy, you're more likely to get these next two episodes. 4 seasons later, South Park reached its 200th episode, titled, of course, 200. The episode is about every celebrity the show's ever made fun of, led by Tom Cruise, attempting to sue the town of South Park for making fun of them. And Cruise will only drop the lawsuit if he gets to meet Muhammad. Yeah, of course, in a celebration of the show's legacy, they'd reference the biggest controversy they'd gotten into up to that point, which was the Muhammad thing. Apparently, Cruise wants to steal Muhammad's power of not being able to be ridiculed or made fun of, and the town has to somehow produce Muhammad without actually showing him, which is a toughie. 200 mostly focuses on that plot, as the prophet is constantly hidden throughout the episode. Various characters from out the show's history end up going after him. The follow-up episode 201 was meant to culminate in showing the prophet on screen. But of course, when the time came to air the episode, he was replaced with a black bar, which I'm 90% sure was voluntary, part of the joke. What definitely wasn't voluntary is that even mentions of Muhammad's name were bleeped, which seems a little extreme. Even the "I learned something today" speech at the end was completely bleeped out, which I find baffling. Muhammad isn't even mentioned in the speech. I checked. The speech is Kyle, Santa, and Jesus agreeing that the only true power in the world is violence. If you don't want to be made fun of, just have guns and bombs and threats. Apparently, Comedy Central censored the entire speech because they didn't want to incite violence, which is another stinky dumb thing. Yeah, I know America is known for having bad media literacy, and most of our adults can't read at a 6th grade level, but surely the average audience at the time could decode one layer of sarcasm, right? What also sucks about 200 and 201 being banned is that they were more than the controversy. These were the episodes that finally revealed who Cartman's father was, a twist the show has been unable to follow up on because the episodes got banned. Yeah, the network was really cautious about depicting Muhammad at all, which I find weird because they'd already done it. Way back in South Park's 5th season, the episode Super Best Friends showed Muhammad, and literally nothing came of it. That's what makes the controversy so weird to me, because South Park had already shown the prophet in their show ages ago, and nobody bat an eye when that happened. The episode wound up banned retroactively, long after the others were taken off of streaming. This is a weird controversy to me for a number of reasons I'd already gone over. Like, logical as it is to be against blasphemy, doing so doesn't exactly educate people. It seems like nobody on the actual crew of South Park knew what was okay to show. Like, watching the actual episode, in 200, anytime Muhammad does or says anything completely off screen, characters wonder aloud if that's okay, and I kind of empathize with that confusion. Full disclosure, I was gonna do a joke where I motioned off screen and said, "Say hi, Mr. Prophet." Nothing happens, and I just say, "Oh, he's shy." Yeah, the joke being that there's nobody there because there's never anyone in the studio with me and the camera goblins. I took it out because, yeah, I don't know what's okay to joke about, even talk about, so my default response is don't say anything. Annoying and often ill-advised as pushing boundaries is, if nobody does it, we don't know where the boundaries are. But yeah, I totally understand the religious significance of this whole controversy, so I get why Comedy Central might have been hesitant to show anything. I mean, the crew got death threats over 200 and 201, and clearly weren't gonna back down themselves. And I have it on good authority that the uncensored version of 201 can be found online, but I'm not gonna get into that. Whatever. I've spent too long on the easy mode controversy of South Park's 5 banned episodes, which is a race I have no horse in, and I don't want to start a holy war again. Don't talk to me about matters of theology anymore. I subscribe to Judaism and nothing else. Oh, not Judaism, Judaism. The school of thought that says that Judah from BoJack Horseman is the greatest person to ever exist, and thus there's no point in anyone else trying. Let's get a tad less political and talk about Fairly Odd Parents, because I found 2 episodes that weren't technically banned, but were deliberately not shown a lot on Nickelodeon. Starting with Twistery. This is an episode from the second season in which Timmy wishes to talk to the founding fathers to write a report, and summons George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson to the present. Rip John and Sam Adams, I guess. The episode promptly spirals into a time travel adventure, but the reason the episode was pulled from Nickelodeon is that 2005 audiences found the more comedically violent portrayals of America's dads to be a bit tasteless. Not sure why they were surprised. It's a Butch Hartman show, and his work tends to do a lot of parody and pastiche. If Abe Lincoln can be a vampire hunter, I see no reason George Washington can't chop wood. But hey, I'm not a 2005 American. I'm a right now American, so who am I to judge? The episode still aired on Nicktoons, however, so this was a pretty soft ban. The other major banned episode of Fairly Odd Parents is It's a Wishful Life, which starts as a usual It's a Wonderful Life parody, in which Timmy wishes he was never born, and gets to see what everyone's lives would be like without him. All normal and fair, but the twist they put on it is rather cynical. Over the episode, Timmy finds that literally everyone he knows, including Cosmo and Wanda, and his actual parents, are better off without him. And you know what the culmination of the episode is? Timmy gets the chance to wish himself back to life, but decides not to because he'd be making people's lives worse by existing. A selfless act, thus proving he deserves to live. What the heck kind of story is that? Timmy's a 10-year-old. Cut the kid some slack. I know they're going for parody, but this is super grim when you even think about it for 2 seconds. And rightfully, the reaction to the episode was so overwhelmingly negative that Nickelodeon pulled it from rotation. Again, not outright banned, but still. Moving on to something less talked about and much more recent, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, a cartoon based on Marvel Comics characters. Thus, as you'd expect, the show only got 2 seasons despite being the best animated work from the brand in years. Cynic I am, I remember calling that in my heart of hearts, but much as I love the show, wouldn't stick around for more than 2 seasons. Someone didn't follow my orders from episode 1. The episode in question is called The Gatekeeper, and is an interesting case because it wasn't so much banned as it was withheld. Rather than being released into controversy like a beef stick to a shark, it was just never thrown into the ocean at all, which is something that happens from time to time, and is why this episode of mine is called Banned Cartoons and More. This is and more. So what happens this episode? Well, it's mostly about the side character, Brooklyn, a transgender teen in Lunella's school, and you already know why this one was held back. I don't even have to summarize the episode. You don't need much more than that. And it's about her playing sports in school? Good God, read the room. This is bad timeline America. If you even attempt to address the concept of transgenderism, or even gender really, in an animated format targeted at kids or not, you are going to be swarmed by locusts while concerned parents burn crosses on the lawns of their ethnic neighbors. Even if you do the topic justice in the most intellectually and emotionally satisfying way possible, the people who will thank you for it are gonna swiftly be outnumbered by the gross online people who hate the transgender and don't want their kids to be too tight or too loose, so to speak. Or you'll be flanked by the people who actually want trans rep in TV but think they could do better than you and will crucify you. Unironically. Half of the viewers will yell at you for doing it and half will yell at you for not doing it right. Props for trying to educate and tell a personal story. Fair is fair. It's a good episode. From a good show, of course, but there's literally no winning with this topic. The cultural wars claims all victims. This is bad timeline America, where Miles Morales never became Spider-Man and everything is worse. But hey, what do the chronically hateful know? The episode apparently won an award, despite never airing on TV. A Velma Award from the Rainbow Project, a non-profit LGBT organization that apparently liked it. So what if we had to stop the episode from airing on TV because the election didn't go how we thought? Actually, that election joke is not true. Rumor is they held back the episode because of the 2024 election, but there's actually a lot of contention over when the final decision was made. Okay, regardless, a decision was made. The episode never aired on TV or made it to Disney+. It's a particular breed of depressing that this sort of thing can still happen in the year of our Lord, Judah Man Now Dog. I thought we moved past this. I guess I was wrong for hoping. The show's entire message is about how everyone has potential to make and do great things. It's basically the cure to modern cynicism. And I know that because I watched the show and didn't hate myself for a solid 3 days. A personal record. And this show isn't exactly shy with its politics, so I don't see how anyone was surprised they did a trans episode. Oh boy, but hey, Devil Dinosaur's advocate here. Not releasing the episode did save us a lot of backlash. Yeah, it leaked online anyway and can be watched easily, and that's probably the best place for it. Optional, a side quest for those who like the show. Returning viewers probably already know my stance on representation, and I really wanted to get worked up about this, take the honest stance. But I'll be honest, I've sort of been ruined by a specific piece of information. I'm gonna bring down the mood a bit, but I truly feel people need to know about this if we're gonna have a serious talk on this subject, okay? Did you know we have statistics on how many transgender characters appear across movies, TV shows, and such in any given year? They're not encouraging, but they exist if you look for them. Do you know what other statistics we keep track of year to year? Hate crimes. And yes, when the number of transgender characters in media goes up, so does the number of hate crimes against transgender individuals. I'm not joking. There shouldn't be music in this part of the episode because I really want you to absorb what I just said. I'm also trying really hard not to swear, even though I don't normally have to hold back like that, because the most I can do is call the situation screwed up, even if a much more evocative word is necessary to convey my actual feelings. And yes, I'm aware that correlation doesn't always equal causation, but in my unprofessional opinion, you would have to be insane to argue that in this case. So yeah, my first instinct is to get worked up that banning this episode is betrayal of the show's own message, but then my logic brain goes, if it had been released, it might have indirectly contributed to hate crimes, which literally no one wants. I get caught up intellectualizing my feelings, and I end up just feeling nothing. And I hate feeling nothing. It's why I watch cartoons, to feel something. So yeah, regretfully, the argument exists that perhaps this episode not airing properly wasn't a bad thing, but the reason why is so depressing that I don't feel remotely good about that. The end result is that this episode is just another reminder that I cannot remember the last time I was able to pin down the decision-making process of the Walt Disney Corporation. If anyone ever tries to tell you that Disney is a political company that secretly puts their own politics into stuff to sway the public, remind them that they stopped this episode from airing. No truly political company with anything to say would bend the knee like that for a show they made. Oh God, this got heavy. Whatever you say about the politics of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, of all shows, at least the politics kinda make sense, unlike the following. The Powerpuff Girls episode, See Me, Feel Me, Know Me. A musical episode that deals with things like religion, communism, individual freedom, like the freedom to say, wait, this was a musical? Yeah, the episode is a musical about a magic gnome who agrees to literally stop all crime and violence as long as the girls give up their powers and stop being heroes. Yeah, a weird thing to make a musical, though it does make more sense when you realize they were going to cast Jack Black as the gnome, which ultimately didn't pan out. But I refuse to believe Jess Harnell is a bad thing. Tip of the hat I don't have. A musical episode isn't a bad idea, but it's let down by a few things. Most of the voice cast clearly aren't singers, or they use character voices when singing, which makes many of the songs grating on the ears, particularly the background characters in Townsville. 2. Even with a double-length episode, the songs don't do a good job articulating the actual things going on, and in a thematically dense episode like this, articulacy is half the grade. Like, the gnome gave everyone freedom, everyone's happy, nobody has issues, until the professor tells the girls that he's not actually giving them freedom. Instead of showing any lack of freedom or the issues that come with utopia, he kinda just says, good things bad, punch a gnome, and they accept this? I truly can't wrap my head around the actual point they're trying to make. Is it that too much freedom is bad? Or is it that freedom doesn't exist? Is this anti-religion, anti-government? I can't figure out what point they're trying to make because they don't talk things out. They sing them poorly, and the result is an incredibly mixed metaphor, which is more confusing than anything. Let's talk about something profoundly less political or controversial, because sometimes an episode of a cartoon might be banned or withheld for reasons other than that. Sometimes something could simply be unreleased or delayed. And that brings us to possibly some of the weirdest cases of this sort of thing I've ever seen, which come from the 2003 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series. Got a weird relationship with this show because I've tried to watch it multiple times and kind of only got to the end of the first season, which doesn't do it justice, I know. It kind of always struck me as the prototype to the 2012 series, you know, since that show ended up following a lot of the same beats, except it called back to the original series too, and had its own ideas on top of that. The Turtles had better voices in my opinion, and generally their version of Shredder was better, but we're getting off topic. Bottom line, I never really gave the show much thought, but it happens to have some interesting banned episodes and such, which we'll get to now. The first episode of which is the episode Insane in the Membrane, not to be confused with my emotional support song of the same name. The episode is about the evil scientist and recurring villain Baxter Stockman, who at this point was basically just a brain in a jar, cloning a new human body for himself. He succeeds, but the body begins to break down, and the process of doing so is downright horrifying. The guy begins to break down mentally, becoming less lucid as the episode goes on, but more importantly, he is physically breaking apart. He loses his jaw at one point, like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly, which this episode is paying deliberate homage to. And now I wish this version of Stockman actually became a fly, like classic Stockman. No nitpicking, talk about the gross stuff. The imagery in this episode is downright sickening at times, or at least as sickening as a 2003 animated series that aired on 4Kids could be. Due to the rather graphic content, the episode straight up didn't air in the US at the time, only airing on Nicktoons in 2015, several years later. A shame, since it's honestly a very sympathetic episode to Stockman, fleshing out the character more than any previous appearance of him in the show, but I suppose I can't argue with the network. Though, that raises the question, if this idea was so questionable from the start, how were they able to make it? The episode was finished, aired in other parts of the world, so clearly they were allowed to make it. What changed? Apparently, at some point between the episode being greenlit, edited, storyboarded, and being finished, there was a massive change in personnel at Fox Broadcasting standards and practices. And by the time the episode was completed, nobody who'd approved it was still working for them. A bit of a rug pull on the production staff, who were working really hard and had no complaints earlier, but the episode is still relatively easy to find and was released on DVD at the time too, so I guess it was a pretty weak ban. So sometimes an episode of a cartoon can be banned for simply being too graphic, which in fairness makes more sense than being banned for covering a controversial topic. You can debate what kids need to know about, but it's pretty hard to debate that an episode will or will not give a kid nightmares. I know I've said before that you can feasibly show a kid anything in a cartoon as long as you're tasteful about it, and the kids will be fine. And I still believe that. Keywords being if you're tasteful about it. And while I take no issue with the episode's plot or writing, the imagery comes off as less tasteful and more excessive. Realistically, if the crew had been given more heads up about stuff to change, we could have gotten a version of this episode that was less sickening and just as haunting, that avoided being banned. But hey, a man can dream. Let's put this episode to bed, because we still have an entire season to get through. Try to follow this, because this might get confusing. The show aired for 4 seasons at 4Kids, and they were in the middle of making a 5th season, meant to wrap up everything and generally be a finale. However, 4Kids wanted to restore some interest in the show, and rather than end it, made the creators fast track a different continuation of the show, which is how we got TMNT Fast Forward. However, through some weird license shenanigans, the 5th season they were making released anyway, marketed as The Lost Episodes, sometime after Fast Forward aired. Except Fast Forward wasn't an alternate continuation of season 4, because it picked up after The Lost Episodes, despite airing first, which made it really confusing as to which season was the actual 5th season. Got all that? Because that's about as confusing as things will get for now. These 13 episodes weren't necessarily banned, more lost in the shuffle of production, which I think makes them more interesting than episode which was banned for inciting a crusade, or something like that. It's easy to be controversial, it's a lot harder to become lost media. At least it used to be. Sorry, I'm still not over Mau Mau. The plot of the season is pretty straightforward. It's the turtles training in more ancient ninjutsu, i.e. magic, to stop a resurrected demonic shredder. And these episodes are often lauded as the single best season of the series. That's about all you need to know, because I'm not giving a play-by-play of all 12 of these episodes. Oh yeah, you heard right, 12 episodes. Which brings me to probably the weirdest case here. 13 episodes are written for the season, one of which was never finished. Our next topic, Nightmares Recycled. This episode was supposed to be the return of early series villain, the Garbage Man, this deformed looking, well, Garbage Man. The episode has the turtles team up with their longtime enemy Hun to escape the Garbage Man's clutches, culminating in the reveal that the Garbage Man is Hun's brother. That sounds pretty typical in heroes team up with the bad guy to escape a bigger bad guy way. Now, there's a few drafts of this episode that we know about, each of which were rather different. So I am paraphrasing here, but the reveal is that Hun and Garbage Man weren't just brothers, they were conjoined twins, with Garbage Man being the more deformed, horror movie looking twin that got surgically removed in the past and later modified into the thing he is today. There's a few versions of the story, but that's generally how it went in the 3 drafts we know about. And the episode was gonna end with Hun actually killing his brother, dropping him in acid, and apparently not shedding tears. Again, that changed from draft to draft, but it was a network note that Hun should have a more mixed reaction to killing his brother. Also, by the final draft, it was gonna be revealed that Garbage Man survived, which is pretty tame supervillain stuff, but as with Insane in the Membrane, the plug was pulled on this episode due to concerns over graphic content. We don't know what the scenes would have looked like. Some sequences were partly completed by the time the orders came down to stop it, but the only bits of this episode we have are some unfinished script segments and concept art. No idea how graphic the episode was going to be, but considering standards and practices cut them off before finishing, we can assume it might have been on the level of Insane in the Membrane. Truth be told, what was described here wasn't exactly the most evocative imagery, so I could easily imagine a version of this episode that wasn't nearly as gruesome as Insane in the Membrane, but still would have been rather dark. Again, it's hard to know without any storyboards or completed scenes. Hey, remember what I said earlier? Glad you do. Assuming the episode was tasteful about its more grim visuals, and it sounds like said visuals were gonna be limited to just a flashback of Garbage Man's origin, and there would have been less of them, it could have turned out fine. Especially since Garbage Man's little dip in the kiddie pool with a bad pH balance wasn't gonna be fatal. By this point, a concerned parent is probably yelling at me specifically, "Why are you okay with showing the kids of 2003 such graphic imagery?" To which I'd say, I'm really not. I'd just like some consistency with what the show was able to get away with. I've been talking around it, but this show was really dark, even for the time. Baxter Stockman being reduced to a brain in a jar was already in the show, and that didn't get it banned. Nano's apparent death in season 1 was haunting. And lest we forget, the genocide episode. 4 kids lit a mass grave on TV screens, but not a single cigarette in One Piece. And again, Insane in the Membrane may not have been aired in the US, but it was preserved in the DVD release. And the plan for the lost episodes didn't seem to originally be to air them on TV anyway, but to keep them confined to DVD. I may think of the 2012 series as being more disturbing, what with body horror and mutations and such, but this series was nothing to scoff at when it came to dark themes and imagery. Considering what it was able to get away with, Nightmares Recycled doesn't sound that bad, weird as it is to say. Something else that interests me about this episode is its relation to the canon of the series. Nightmares Recycled was going to be the reveal of Garbage Man's origin, which didn't end up panning out, but we never had an origin for the dude prior. The separated at birth by scalpel story remains the only attempt any media has made to give this guy a backstory, which makes me wonder if it's still canon to the show. Nothing contradicts it, or if it's an abandoned concept since it didn't air on the show itself. A show about superhero ninjas giving us a villain whose backstory is entirely confined to deleted content, leaving me to wonder if the deleted origin still counts or not. I didn't think there'd be more than one. To summarize, the show had an episode initially not aired due to brutal imagery, had an entire season nearly get deleted only to be released later in confusing circumstances, and one episode of that season didn't make it out alive, half-formed and unloved like the very character it portrayed. Whoops, in my effort to cover a variety of banned cartoon episodes, I've not gone over every episode I wanted to. Better pick up the pace. Speed round time. A bunch of Pokemon episodes, and let's face it, you can go to pretty much any Pokemon YouTuber and they'll explain them better than I can. An insane number of episodes of a variety of shows banned or pulled from syndication because 9/11 happened and everyone got real depressed for a while. An episode of Bob the Builder was never released in the US dub because the characters used horse manure to make a garden for tropical plants, and I guess someone thought the British version had too many poo jokes. This Bluey episode where Bandit plays pretend pregnant was banned in the US. In their first season, a Phineas and Ferb episode got hit with a legal claim due to featuring a band called the Bettys because they must not have known that there was an actual band with that name, so it was pulled. Dexter's Lab episode was banned and censored due to incessant profanity, and frankly, I want to know what anyone expected to happen to that one, because really, what else was gonna happen? It's a kid's show. This one episode of Clarence, a show I'm convinced no one talks about, where Clarence eats 500 deviled eggs, was banned, and as far as I can tell, just because the premise was gross, a surprising number of episodes of Buzz Lightyear Star Command were pulled for a variety of reasons, but you basically can't find this show anymore without pirating it nowadays, so is that really anyone's loss? I am quickly running out of time for an actual thesis statement, so let's wrap this episode up by asking, how do we deal with banned content? Not why do we make them, because no one chooses to make something that gets banned, okay? That decision is made for them. Well, I don't have an all-encompassing answer for that. I just know what I believe. And if you haven't noticed, a running theme of this episode was me going, most of these could have worked if we tweaked them a bit or attempted to settle the issues around them. But that's flawed, isn't it? Because we don't solve anything. Most of the stuff banned in the 90s would still get banned today for a lot of the same reasons. This isn't the thesis, okay? This is just my belief. Everyone should have the ability to make art. And animation is art, so that includes cartoons. I consider art the 31st human right, okay? I'm serious. Like, such a world would make us measure how we respond to media rather than simply casting everything we don't like into the nether. If we do that, we'll know what to do with these kinds of things. All of the banned stuff I talked about made for interesting topics, and these are conversations we need to have. Look, the questionable, no matter how objectionable, should be at least given the right to exist. How are we gonna ask questions without the questionable? And if we're serious about animation being art, we have to adopt this for cartoons as well. I know, tangent, but look, I'm serious as death when I say that art is intrinsically important to an individual's existence. I had 4 grandparents. All of them grew to ripe old ages, and I watched it happen to 3 of them. I know what getting old is like. If I live long enough, I'm going to end up in a nursing home, and circumstances permitting, I'll end up watching something I made, and I'll realize that my art remembers me better than I do, and I will have this revelation several times. Think about this stuff before you ban it, okay? Tune in to other episodes of Cartoon Gateway for more cartoon discussion, or maybe more little-known facts about me, such as, Judah aside, the BoJack Horseman character I most relate to is Diane, because we both happen to gain weight while living in Chicago.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.